The sparks flew in lazy arcs across the concrete floor, each one dying with a soft hiss as Chen pulled the welding torch away from the steel beam. They thought she was just another welder in coveralls and safety goggles, grinding through another 12-hour shift at the shipyard. But when the impossible happened, when every expert failed and every protocol crumbled, Delta Force would call her by a name that hadn't been spoken in 7 years. A name that could turn the tide of a crisis no one saw coming. The morning air at Northport Shipyard carried the familiar cocktail of salt spray, diesel fumes, and hot metal that had become Maya's daily soundtrack. She adjusted her welding mask with a gloved hand, the reflective surface catching the amber glow of the overhead. Sodium lights that never seemed to shut off, even in broad daylight. Around her, the skeleton of a cargo vessel rose like the rib cage of some massive beast, its steel ribs waiting to be clothed in hull plating and superstructure. Her workstation occupied a corner of Bay 7, the largest of the construction halls, where the echo of hammers and grinders created a constant industrial symphony. Maya had claimed his spot 6 months ago when she'd started at Northport, and she'd made it hers with the kind of methodical precision that spoke of someone who understood the importance of controlling your environment. Her tools were arranged in perfect order along the metal workbench, tungsten electrodes sorted by diameter, welding rods organized by alloy composition, measuring instruments calibrated and cleaned after each use. The other welders had noticed, of course. They always did. In an industry where most workers treated their equipment like rental gear, Maya's obsessive organization stood out like a surgeon's kit in a garage. She'd caught sideways glances when she'd first arrived, seen the raised eyebrows when she'd spent her first week not just learning the job requirements, but mapping every safety protocol, every emergency exit, every power shutoff in the entire facility. Old-timers like Jack Morrison and Pete Valdez had exchanged those looks that said another perfectionist wouldn't last a month once the real work started. But Maya had lasted, more than lasted. She'd become the go-to welder for the precision work that others couldn't handle, the delicate joints that required not just skill, but an understanding of metallurgy that went beyond what any technical school taught. When the project supervisors needed someone to weld the critical stress points on the ship's keel, they called Maya. When the Navy inspectors flagged a section for rework, they sent Maya to fix it. She never missed a deadline, never failed an inspection, never complained about the overtime or the impossible angles or the heat that turned the welding bays into furnaces by midday. What they didn't know was that every movement she made, every decision about rod angle and heat application and timing, drew from a knowledge base that had been forged in places where mistakes didn't just mean failed inspections. They meant dead teammates in compromised missions and the kind of failure that echoed through intelligence communities for years. Maya's hands had learned precision under circumstances where the difference between a perfect weld and an adequate one could determine whether a vehicle survived an IED blast or whether a covert facility remained hidden from satellite surveillance. The morning progressed with its usual rhythm. Maya worked her way down a series of vertical joints on the cargo hold frame, each one requiring a different approach based on the steel's thickness and the stress loads it would bear once the ship was complete. She moved with an economy of motion that spoke of muscle memory refined through repetition, but also of a deeper understanding of physics and engineering that her colleagues couldn't quite place. When she welded, she didn't just follow the blueprints. She saw the forces that would act on each joint, understood how thermal expansion and metal fatigue would affect the structure over years of ocean service. Around 10:30, the morning brake whistle echoed across the shipyard, and the industrial noise began to die down as workers shut off their equipment and headed for the break room. Maya finished her current seam with 3 precise passes, checked her work with a magnifying lens, and made a note on her progress sheet before securing her tools. She pulled off her welding gloves and tucked them into her belt, then removed her safety glasses and rubbed her eyes with the back of her hand. The break room was a long, fluorescent-lit space with mismatched tables and chairs that had seen better decades. Coffee machines hummed along one wall, and vending machines offered an array of snacks that could survive a nuclear winter. Maya poured herself a cup of coffee from the machine nearest the windows, added 2 sugars, and found a seat at a table where she could watch the harbor through the salt-stained glass. Jack Morrison approached with his own coffee, his weathered face creased into its habitual expression of mild skepticism. At 58, Jack had been welding since before Maya was born, and he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen every type of metal joint failure in equipment malfunction the industry could produce. He settled into the chair across from her with a slight grunt, his movements careful in the way of someone whose back had absorbed decades of industrial labor. "You're making the rest of us look bad," Jack said, though his tone carried more curiosity than complaint. "The supervisor came by yesterday, said your work on the keel sections was the cleanest he'd seen in 20 years. Where'd you learn to weld like that?" Maya sipped her coffee and considered her answer. It was a question she'd fielded before, and she'd developed a response that was technically true while revealing nothing meaningful. "Learned in the service," she said. "Had some good instructors." "Which branch?" Jack pressed, leaning back in his chair. "I was in the Navy myself, back in the day. Served on destroyers mostly, did some welding work in the engine rooms." "Army," Maya replied. She took another sip of coffee and let her gaze drift back to the harbor, where a container ship was maneuvering toward the main docks with the help of 2 tugboats, mostly engineering work. Nothing too exciting. It was the same deflection she always used, and like most people, Jack accepted it at face value. Veterans were common at Northport, drawn by steady work and decent benefits, and most of them preferred not to elaborate on their service experiences. Jack nodded and changed the subject to the upcoming inspection schedule, and Maya listened with half her attention while tracking the movement of vehicles around the shipyard perimeter. She developed the habit during her first week at Northport, cataloging the normal patterns of security patrols, delivery schedules, and personnel movements. It wasn't paranoia, exactly, though she'd been accused of that before. It was more like muscle memory, the automatic awareness that had kept her alive during 6 years of missions that officially never happened in countries that officially never hosted American military personnel. Even now, 7 years after her discharge, she found herself noting exit routes and potential cover positions, tracking the faces of security guards and delivery drivers, measuring response times when alarms went off for routine drills. The break ended with another whistle blast, and Maya returned to her workstation to find a new set of blueprints waiting on her bench. The project supervisor, a thin man named Richards with nervous energy and permanently ink-stained fingers, appeared at her elbow as she examined the drawings. "Special job," Richards explained, tapping the blueprint with a pencil. "Navy wants some modifications to the communications array housing. Very specific tolerance requirements, and they want it done by someone with security clearance." Maya looked up from the blueprint, her expression carefully neutral. "I don't have current clearance. You had it though, right? Shows in your file that you held secret clearance during your service. Navy says that's sufficient for this project, even if it's expired." Richards shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "Look, I know it's not your usual work, but they specifically requested you. Apparently someone reviewed your quality scores and decided you were the right person for the job." She studied the blueprint more carefully, noting the precise specifications and the unusual alloy requirements. The housing design was more complex than typical shipboard installations, with multiple layers of shielding and what appeared to be specialized mounting points for equipment that wasn't shown in the drawings. It was the kind of work that required not just welding skill, but an understanding of electromagnetic interference and signal security, the kind of knowledge that most civilian welders wouldn't possess. When do they need it completed? Maya asked. End of the week. I know it's a tight timeline, but the Navy's paying premium rates for rush delivery. Richards glanced around the shipyard as if checking for eavesdroppers. Between you and me, this seems like more than just a standard communications upgrade. The materials they're providing are specialized stuff, not the usual Navy inventory. Maya nodded and rolled up the blueprint. I'll need a separate work area. This kind of precision welding requires controlled conditions, already arranged. Bay 12 is being cleared out for you. Climate-controlled, dedicated power supply, the works. Richards looked relieved that she'd accepted the assignment. Materials will be delivered this afternoon. Navy liaison will be here tomorrow to review. Progress. After Richards left, Maya stood alone at her workstation, rolling the blueprint between her hands while her mind processed the implications. Special materials, security requirements, and a Navy liaison for what should have been routine modification. Work. It felt familiar in ways that made her shoulders tense with old reflexes. The kind of familiar that meant someone, somewhere, was preparing for something that required very specific capabilities. She spent the rest of the morning finishing her regular assignments, working through the vertical joints with mechanical precision while her thoughts remained focused on the blueprint tucked into her tool bag. The communications array housing wasn't standard equipment, and the tolerances specified in the drawings suggested performance requirements that went far beyond normal shipboard communications. The shielding design, in particular, indicated protection against electronic warfare capabilities that most naval vessels weren't expected to encounter. By lunchtime, Maya had completed her section of the cargo hold framework and signed off on the quality inspection forms. She cleaned her tools with extra care, organizing them in their designated positions before securing her workstation. Around her, the shipyard hummed with its usual controlled chaos of construction noise and radio chatter. But underneath it all, she sensed the subtle change that came when special projects entered the workflow. Extra security guards at the main gate, unfamiliar vehicles in the visitor parking area, and the kind of tension that civilian supervisors carried when military contracts involved requirements they didn't fully understand. As Maya walked toward the break room for lunch, she passed Bay 12 and noted the modifications already underway. New power feeds were being installed, and workers were setting up environmental controls that would maintain precise temperature and humidity levels. Through the open bay doors, she could see pallets of materials covered in military specification shipping covers, the kind that indicated controlled substances, requiring special handling procedures. She bought a sandwich from the vending machine and found a quiet table near the window where she could observe the continued preparations while appearing to read the newspaper someone had left behind. The headline spoke of international tensions and diplomatic negotiations, the usual background noise of global politics that most civilians barely noticed. But Maya read between the lines with the trained eye of someone who'd once been briefed on the implications of those diplomatic failures, someone who understood how quickly international tensions could escalate into the kind of operations that required very specific technical capabilities. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her landlord about a maintenance issue at her apartment, and Maya responded automatically while her attention remained focused on the activity around Bay 12. Two men in suits had arrived and were examining the materials with the kind of systematic thoroughness that spoke of military training. They moved like people accustomed to operational security, checking corners and sightlines with unconscious precision. Maya finished her sandwich and returned to her regular workstation, but her concentration remained divided. The afternoon passed slowly as she worked through routine assignments while monitoring the preparations in Bay 12. By closing time, the bay had been transformed into what appeared to be a miniature precision manufacturing facility, complete with specialized welding equipment and measuring instruments that cost more than most workers' annual salaries. As she gathered her tools and prepared to leave for the day, Maya caught sight of her reflection in the darkened window of the administrative building. A woman in work coveralls and safety gear, indistinguishable from dozens of other shipyard employees heading home after another day of industrial labor. Nobody looking at her would suspect that she'd once possessed technical knowledge that could shift the balance of covert operations, or that her hands had once built devices that existed in the shadowy world where military technology merged with intelligence requirements. Tomorrow she would begin work on a project that felt uncomfortably familiar, using skills that she'd hoped to leave buried in a past that officially never existed. But for now, she was just another welder walking to her car in the gathering dusk, carrying tools instead of weapons, building ships instead of the specialized equipment that made impossible missions possible. The harbor lights began to flicker on as Maya reached her car, and she paused for a moment to watch the evening shift taking over from the day workers. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that somewhere in the classified corridors of military planning, decisions were being made that might soon require capabilities they couldn't imagine. Maya started her engine and drove toward the shipyard exit, leaving behind another day of ordinary work that felt increasingly like preparation for something extraordinary. Maya arrived at Northport Shipyard the next morning to find Bay 12 transformed into something that resembled a high-security laboratory more than a typical welding station. Cleanroom protocols had been established overnight, with air filtration systems humming quietly in the corners and specialized lighting that eliminated shadows while protecting sensitive materials from UV exposure. Her regular coveralls had been replaced by a pristine set waiting in a sealed package on the workbench, along with new safety equipment that bore military specification numbers rather than commercial-grade markings. The materials themselves were unlike anything she'd worked with in civilian employment. The alloy compositions were exotic blends of titanium, vanadium, and elements she recognized from classified projects that had required security briefings just to discuss their properties. Each piece had been precision-cut using techniques that left surfaces so smooth they reflected light like mirrors, and the dimensional tolerances were specified to measurements that required electron microscopy to verify. Dr. Sarah Hendricks, the Navy liaison, appeared at Maya's shoulder as she examined the materials. Hendricks wore civilian clothes but moved with the controlled efficiency of someone accustomed to classified environments. Her handshake was firm, and her eyes held the kind of direct assessment that Maya remembered from intelligence briefings, where every detail mattered and nothing was left to chance. "Miss Chen," Hendricks said, consulting a tablet that displayed information Maya couldn't see from her angle. "I've reviewed your service record and your quality scores here at Northport. Impressive work. This project will require that same level of precision, but with some additional considerations we'll need to discuss." Maya nodded, her hands already moving to examine the specialized welding equipment that had been installed overnight. The torch assemblies were military specification, designed for work that required not just precision, but complete electromagnetic signature control. The power supplies bore classification markings that indicated capabilities beyond anything needed for standard shipbuilding, and the gas delivery systems included mixtures that were typically restricted to facilities with specific security clearances. "The housing we're building," Hendricks continued, "will be integrated into communication systems that require absolute reliability under extreme conditions. The welding specifications aren't just about structural integrity. They're about maintaining signal clarity and electromagnetic isolation in environments where standard equipment fails." It was a careful explanation that revealed nothing while confirming everything Maya had suspected. She'd built similar housings before, during missions where communication equipment needed to function, despite electronic warfare countermeasures and environmental conditions that would destroy conventional systems. The techniques required weren't taught in civilian welding programs, and the materials couldn't be obtained through normal supply channels. "I understand," Maya replied, testing the balance of the specialized torch in her hand. "What's the timeline?" "For completion?" 72 hours, Hendricks said. "The housing needs to be completed, tested, and ready for installation by Friday afternoon. I'll be here to monitor progress and ensure quality standards are met." Maya spent the morning familiarizing herself with the modified equipment and reviewing the detailed specifications that Hendricks provided in carefully controlled portions. Each section of the blueprint was revealed only when she needed it for the current phase of work, a security protocol that prevented anyone from seeing the complete design of what they were building. It was a familiar restriction from her military service, when operational security meant that even the people building critical equipment understood only their specific contribution to the larger mission. The actual welding began after lunch. When environmental conditions had stabilized and the specialized atmosphere controls had reached optimal settings, Maya approached the work with the kind of methodical precision that had once made her invaluable to operations that couldn't afford equipment failures. Each joint required multiple passes with different alloy compositions, building up layers of material that would provide not just structural strength but specific electromagnetic properties that standard welding couldn't achieve. Pete Valdez stopped by during the afternoon break, curiosity overcoming the general instruction that Bay 12 was off-limits to non-essential personnel. He stood at the edge of the clean area, hands in his pockets, watching Maya work through the transparent partition that had been installed to maintain environmental controls. "Never seen anything like this setup," Pete commented when Maya emerged for a few minutes to rest her eyes from the intense precision work. "Looks like something from a science fiction movie. What exactly are you building in there?" Maya pulled off her specialized welding helmet and wiped sweat from her forehead with a clean towel. "Communications equipment housing," she said, which was technically accurate while revealing nothing meaningful. "The Navy has specific requirements for signal isolation." Pete nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with the explanation. "Jack was saying they brought in some kind of specialist to oversee the work, military contractor or something. Must be important equipment to justify all this expense." Through the partition, Maya could see Dr. Hendricks reviewing measurement data on her tablet while occasionally glancing at the work in progress. There was something familiar about Hendricks' manner, a way of observing technical work that suggested knowledge beyond what a typical Navy liaison would possess. She moved like someone who understood not just the specifications, but the operational applications of what was being built. "Probably just standard military oversimplification," Maya replied, giving Pete the kind of dismissive response that would satisfy his curiosity without encouraging further questions. "You know how government contracts work. Everything has to be perfect, even when good enough would do the job." Pete laughed and agreed, launching into a familiar complaint about military specifications that applied unrealistic standards to routine equipment. Maya listened with appropriate interest while her attention remained focused on the work waiting inside Bay 12. The afternoon schedule called for completing the primary structural elements before the electromagnetic shielding layers could be applied, and the timing requirements allowed no margin for delay or rework. When Pete left to return to his own assignments, Maya re-entered the controlled environment and resumed work on the most critical joints in the housing assembly. These connections would carry not just structural loads, but electrical currents that required specific resistance characteristics, and the welding technique involved precise temperature control that demanded constant attention to torch angle and travel speed. Dr. Hendricks approached the workstation as Maya completed a particularly complex corner joint that required 3 different alloy layers applied in sequence. "Excellent work," Hendricks observed, consulting measurements displayed on a handheld analyzer. The electromagnetic properties are exactly within specification. Where did you develop this level of precision with multi-alloy applications? Maya paused in her work, recognizing the question as more than casual professional interest. Advanced training during my service, she replied carefully. Specialized applications that required non-standard techniques. What unit? Hendricks asked, her tone remaining conversational while her eyes held the sharp focus of someone conducting an interview rather than making small talk. Engineering support, Maya said, providing the same vague response she'd given Jack Morrison and countless others who'd asked about her military background. Nothing particularly exciting. Just technical work that happened to require precise specifications. Hendricks nodded, but her expression suggested she understood. The careful non-answers that veterans used when discussing classified assignments. She made a note on her tablet and moved away to examine other aspects of the work area. But Maya could feel the continued assessment in her peripheral attention. The remainder of the afternoon passed in concentrated technical work that required complete focus on torch control and material properties. Maya lost herself in the familiar rhythm of precision welding, where success depended on reading subtle changes in metal color and listening to the slight variations in arc sound that indicated perfect fusion between dissimilar alloys. It was meditative work that engaged muscle memory developed through thousands of hours of practice under conditions where perfection wasn't a goal but a survival requirement. By 5 o'clock, the primary structural assembly was complete, and initial testing indicated that all specifications had been met within the narrow tolerances required. Maya secured her equipment and cleaned the work area according to the protocols that Dr. Hendricks had established, ensuring that no contamination would affect the electromagnetic shielding work scheduled for the following day. Impressive progress, Hendricks commented as she reviewed the day's measurements and photographs documenting each completed joint. You're ahead of schedule, which gives us some flexibility for the more complex work tomorrow. Maya nodded while organizing her tools according to the systematic arrangement that had become second nature. The shielding layers will require different techniques, she observed. More complex atmosphere control and longer cooling cycles between passes. You're familiar with electromagnetic shielding applications? Hendricks asked, her tone carrying the same careful interest that had characterized her earlier questions. Some exposure during my service, Maya replied. Enough to understand the basic principles and material requirements. It was another carefully measured response that acknowledged knowledge without revealing its source or extent. Maya had learned during her military career that the most effective way to handle security-sensitive conversations was to provide answers that were technically accurate while offering no useful information to anyone who didn't already know the complete story. Hendricks seemed to accept this approach, perhaps recognizing it as the standard operational security practice of someone who'd once held classified responsibilities. She secured her tablet and began gathering the specialized measurement equipment that would be needed for the next day's work. I'll be here early tomorrow to monitor the shielding application, Hendricks said. The electromagnetic properties we're trying to achieve require very specific layering techniques, and the margin for error is essentially zero. Maya acknowledged this with a professional nod while privately recognizing that the real challenge would begin tomorrow. Electromagnetic shielding met military specifications for communication equipment required techniques that went far beyond conventional welding skills. The materials had to be applied in precise thicknesses while maintaining specific crystal structures that would provide frequency-selective attenuation, and the process couldn't be rushed or repeated if mistakes were made. As Maya left Bay 12 and returned to the regular shipyard environment, the contrast was striking. The normal industrial noise and casual conversations of workers ending their shifts seemed almost primitive, compared to the controlled precision of the specialized facility that had been created for her project. She gathered her personal tools from her regular workstation and signed out according to standard procedures, but her mind remained focused on the technical challenges waiting for the next day. Jack Morrison caught up with her near the parking lot, his expression carrying the mixture of curiosity and concern that had become familiar among her coworkers. "Heard you're working on some kind of special project," he said. "Hope they're paying you extra for all the fancy equipment and supervision." "Standard rates," Maya replied, which was true as far as her official paycheck was concerned. What Jack couldn't know was that the project itself represented compensation of a different kind, an opportunity to use skills that had defined her identity for years before civilian life had buried them under routine industrial work. "Well, be careful with whatever they've got you doing," Jack advised with the protective concern of an older worker looking out for a younger colleague. "Military contracts can get complicated fast, and sometimes the complications aren't worth the extra attention." Maya thanked him for the advice and walked to her car, considering the wisdom in his casual warning. Military contracts did indeed carry complications that civilian workers rarely anticipated, and her own experience had taught her that the most dangerous complications were often the ones that remained invisible until operational requirements demanded capabilities that officially didn't exist. She drove home through the familiar streets of the working-class neighborhood where she'd built her quiet civilian life, passing the same shops and houses that had become the stable background of her daily routine. But tonight, the normalcy felt temporary, like a stage set that might be struck at any moment to reveal the more complex reality that had always existed beneath the surface. At her apartment, Maya heated a simple dinner and reviewed technical manuals that she'd kept from her military service, refreshing her knowledge of electromagnetic theory and shielding applications. The books were officially unclassified, but they contained information that became significant only when combined with practical experience that few people possessed. As she studied the familiar diagrams and equations, Maya felt the return of mental patterns that had once made her invaluable to missions that required technical solutions to operational problems that couldn't be solved through conventional military approaches. Tomorrow would bring the most challenging phase of the project, when theoretical knowledge would be translated into practical applications under conditions that allowed no room for error. Maya fell asleep thinking about torch angles and cooling rates, her dreams filled with the precise movements and split-second timing that separated successful completion from catastrophic failure. The electromagnetic shielding work began at dawn, with environmental conditions that had to be perfect before Maya could even begin heating her torch. Dr. Hendricks arrived 30 minutes before the official start time, carrying additional equipment that she assembled with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood both the technical requirements and the security implications of what they were building. The specialized materials for the shielding layers came in sealed containers that required biometric authorization to open, each one containing alloys that weren't available through civilian supply chains. Maya examined the shielding materials with the critical eye of someone who understood their strategic importance. The primary layer consisted of a copper-silver composite that had been processed using techniques that created specific grain structures for optimal electromagnetic absorption. The secondary layer was a nickel-iron alloy with magnetic properties that had been precisely engineered to provide frequency-selective shielding. And the final layer incorporated elements that Maya recognized from classified research into metamaterials with properties that didn't occur in nature. "The layering sequence is critical," Dr. Hendricks explained, consulting specifications that were displayed on a secure tablet requiring fingerprint authentication to access. Each layer must achieve specific thickness tolerances while maintaining crystal structures that provide the required electromagnetic properties. Any deviation from the specified parameters will compromise the entire assembly's performance. Maya nodded while adjusting the specialized welding equipment that had been calibrated. overnight to maintain the precise temperatures required for each material layer. The torch assemblies included atmosphere control systems that would prevent oxidation while ensuring that the metal cooling rates produced the desired material properties. The work required not just welding skill, but an understanding of metallurgy that went far beyond what civilian training provided. The first layer application began with Maya working in sections no larger than 6 inches square, building up the copper-silver composite in multiple, thin passes that gradually achieved the specified thickness, while maintaining the electrical conductivity properties that would make the shielding effective. Each pass required different torch settings and atmosphere compositions, and the cooling between passes had to follow precise timing sequences that couldn't be rushed or delayed. Dr. Hendricks monitored the work through instruments that measured not just dimensions but electromagnetic properties in real time. "Excellent conductivity readings," she observed as Maya completed the first section. "The grain structure is forming exactly as specified. Your technique with multi-layer applications is exceptional. Where did you develop this level of precision?" It was the third time Hendricks had asked about Maya's background, and the persistence suggested more than casual professional interest. Maya continued working while formulating her response, recognizing that the questions were becoming more direct and would eventually require answers that went beyond her standard deflections. "Specialized military training," Maya replied, adjusting her torch angle to maintain optimal heat distribution. "Some projects required non-standard techniques that weren't covered in conventional welding programs." "What kind of projects?" Hendricks pressed, her tone remaining conversational while her attention focused intently on Maya's response. Maya paused in her work and looked directly at Dr. Hendricks, recognizing that the careful questioning had reached a point where evasive answers would no longer satisfy whatever assessment was being conducted. "The kind that required security clearances above what I currently hold," she said. "Projects where the technical specifications were more important than the people who built them." Hendricks nodded, seeming to accept this response while making another note on her secure tablet. "I've reviewed your military records," she said. "There are significant gaps in the documentation. Periods of assignment that are listed only as special projects with no details about location or mission parameters." Maya resumed her welding work, using the precise movements required for the shielding application to buy time while considering how much information she was willing to reveal. The gaps in her records weren't accidental oversights. They were deliberate redactions that protected operational security for missions that officially never happened. Discussing them, even with someone who claimed official authorization, could trigger security reviews that would complicate her carefully constructed civilian life. "Some military assignments don't generate detailed records," Maya said, completing another section of the primary shielding layer, "especially when the work involves capabilities that need to remain classified for operational security reasons, like the ability to build communication equipment that can operate in electronic warfare environments," Hendricks observed. "Equipment that can maintain signal integrity despite jamming and interference that would disable conventional systems." Maya's torch movements faltered slightly as she recognized the specific nature of what Hendricks was describing. Electronic warfare countermeasures were a specialized field that required knowledge of frequency analysis and signal processing techniques that weren't taught in civilian programs. The fact that Hendricks understood these requirements suggested that she knew more about Maya's background than their previous conversations had indicated. "I've worked on projects that required electromagnetic isolation," Maya admitted, returning her focus to the precise torch control required for the shielding work. "But that was years ago, under circumstances that don't apply to civilian applications." "What if those circumstances were to change?" Hendricks asked quietly. "What if there were situations where your specialized knowledge became operationally relevant again?" Maya shut off her torch and set it aside, recognizing that the conversation had moved beyond casual assessment into something that resembled recruitment. She pulled off her welding helmet and faced Dr. Hendricks directly, noting the way the other woman's posture had shifted into the alert readiness of someone preparing to deliver information that would change the nature of their professional relationship. "Dr. Hendricks," Maya said carefully, "I'm a civilian contractor working on a Navy communication project. Whatever you're suggesting goes beyond the scope of my current employment and my security clearance authorization." "Your current clearance," Hendricks replied, emphasizing the word current in a way that suggested knowledge of previous authorization levels. "But clearances can be reactivated when operational requirements justify the security risk, especially when the individual in question possesses capabilities that can't be replicated through conventional training programs." Maya felt the familiar tension that came when civilian normalcy began to dissolve and the more complex realities of classified operations started to emerge. She'd spent 7 years building a life that existed entirely in the unclassified world, where her most significant decisions involved welding techniques and work schedules rather than operational security and mission parameters. The prospect of returning to the environment where those distinctions mattered carried both appeal and apprehension in equal measure. "What exactly are you proposing?" Maya asked, though part of her already suspected the answer based on the specialized nature of the equipment they were building and the careful assessment that Hendricks had been conducting since her arrival. "Complete this project first," Hendricks sighed, gesturing toward the partially assembled communication housing. "Demonstrate that your technical capabilities remain at the level indicated in your classified records. Then we'll discuss opportunities that might be appropriate for someone with your background and security history." Maya returned to her welding work, but the conversation had shifted her mental focus from pure technical execution to the broader implications of what she was building and why her specific skills had been requested. The communication housing they were assembling wasn't just sophisticated. It was designed to meet performance requirements that suggested operational environments where conventional equipment wouldn't survive. The electromagnetic shielding specifications were military grade, and the structural requirements indicated installations that might need to function despite physical damage that would destroy normal systems. The morning progressed with Maya working through the complex layering sequence required for the electromagnetic shielding, while Dr. Hendricks monitored progress through increasingly sophisticated measurement equipment. The secondary layer of nickel-iron alloy required welding techniques that maintained magnetic properties while achieving structural integration with the underlying copper-silver composite, and the process couldn't be rushed without compromising the electromagnetic performance that made the entire assembly functional. During the lunch break, Maya found herself unable to concentrate on the casual conversations in the employee break room. Jack Morrison and Pete Valdez discussed weekend plans and complained about management decisions with the comfortable familiarity of workers whose primary concerns remained entirely within the civilian world. Maya listened with appropriate responses while her thoughts remained focused on the Maya implications of her conversation with Dr. Hendricks and the growing certainty that the communication project represented something more significant than routine. Naval equipment upgrade. "You've been quiet today," Jack observed as they returned to their respective work areas. "Is everything okay with the special project? Not running into problems with all that fancy equipment, I hope." "Just concentration requirements," Maya replied. "The precision work demands complete focus, and the Navy supervisor has very specific quality standards that need to be met." It was an honest answer that revealed nothing about the nature of her concerns or the direction that her professional situation appeared to be taking. Jack accepted the explanation with a sympathetic nod, having worked enough military contracts to understand that government projects often involved complications that civilian workers weren't equipped to handle. The afternoon brought the most challenging phase of the shielding work, when the final metamaterial layer had to be applied using techniques that required precise control of cooling rates and atmosphere composition. The materials themselves were exotic composites that had been engineered to provide electromagnetic properties that didn't exist in conventional alloys, and the application process required knowledge of physics principles that weren't covered in standard welding training. Maya worked with the complete concentration that the process demanded, monitoring temperature gradients and electromagnetic field measurements while building up the final shielding layer in precisely controlled increments. Dr. Hendricks observed from close range, occasionally checking measurements that confirmed the electromagnetic properties were developing according to the strict specifications required for operational effectiveness. "Outstanding work," Hendricks commented as Maya completed the final section of the metamaterial layer. "The electromagnetic absorption characteristics are exactly within the specified parameters. This level of precision indicates training and experience that goes well beyond civilian welding programs." Maya secured her equipment and began the cleaning procedures required to maintain the controlled environment while the shielding assembly underwent final cooling and stabilization. The work was complete, but she understood that finishing the technical requirements was only the beginning of whatever larger process had brought Dr. Hendricks to oversee a project that appeared to require capabilities specifically matched to Maya's classified background. "The testing phase will begin tomorrow," Hendricks announced, consulting the secure tablet that contained information Maya wasn't authorized to access. "We'll need to verify electromagnetic performance under simulated operational conditions before the housing can be approved for installation." Maya nodded while organizing her specialized tools, according to the security protocols that Hendricks had established for the project. The testing phase would reveal whether the communication equipment they'd built could actually perform the functions that its sophisticated design was intended to provide, and the results would determine whether her work met the standards that justified the expense and security precautions that had surrounded the entire project. As Maya prepared to leave Bay 12 for the day, she realized that tomorrow's testing would likely provide answers to questions that had been building since the project began. The nature of the performance requirements, the identity of the end users, and the operational environment where the equipment would be deployed all remained classified information that she wasn't authorized to know. But the testing phase would necessarily reveal enough technical details to indicate whether her suspicions about the project's ultimate purpose were accurate. Dr. Hendricks secured the specialized measurement equipment and locked the bay according to security procedures that exceeded normal shipyard protocols. "Excellent progress today," she said as they completed the shutdown procedures. "Tomorrow's testing will be the final validation of your technical work. I'm confident the results will meet all specified requirements." Maya walked to her car through the familiar shipyard environment that suddenly felt less permanent than it had just days earlier. The routine industrial work that had defined her civilian life was beginning to feel like preparation for something more complex, and her conversation with Dr. Hendricks had suggested possibilities that would require leaving behind the carefully constructed normalcy that had protected her from the complications of her classified past. Maya arrived at the shipyard the following morning to find Bay 12 transformed once again, this time into what appeared to be a sophisticated testing laboratory. Banks of electronic equipment lined the walls, their displays flickering with data streams that monitored electromagnetic signatures across frequency ranges that extended far beyond civilian communication bands. Dr. Hendricks stood beside a central console, reviewing test protocols on multiple screens while technicians didn't recognize calibrated measurement instruments with military precision. The communication housing that Maya had spent 3 days building now occupied the center of an anechoic chamber that had been assembled overnight, its walls lined with specialized materials designed to eliminate electromagnetic reflections that could interfere with performance measurements. Cables snaked from the housing to analysis equipment that bore classification markings, Maya remembered from facilities where testing results determined whether missions succeeded or failed catastrophically. The testing protocol is comprehensive. Dr. Hendricks explained as Maya examined the setup with growing recognition of its sophistication. We'll be evaluating electromagnetic performance under simulated, operational conditions that replicate environments where this equipment will need to function. The test scenarios include electronic warfare countermeasures that would disable conventional communication systems. Maya nodded while studying the test configuration, noting details that confirmed her suspicions about the ultimate destination of the equipment they had built. The frequency ranges being monitored included bands used by military communication satellites and the interference. Simulation equipment was designed to replicate jamming techniques that were employed only in active combat environments where electronic warfare determined tactical advantages. What's my role during the testing phase? Maya asked, recognizing that her technical knowledge of the housing's construction would be valuable for interpreting results that might indicate design or fabrication problems requiring immediate correction. Observation and consultation, Hendricks replied. If the performance measurements indicate problems with the electromagnetic shielding or structural integrity, you'll need to diagnose the source and recommend corrective procedures. The testing timeline doesn't allow for equipment replacement if modifications can resolve performance deficiencies. The first test sequence began with baseline measurements that established the housing's electromagnetic signature under normal operating conditions. Maya watched the displays show signal strength, frequency response, and shielding effectiveness across communication bands that spanned from standard commercial frequencies to specialized military channels that weren't supposed to exist in civilian knowledge. The results indicated performance levels that exceeded the specifications she had been given, suggesting that her welding techniques had achieved electromagnetic properties that were even better than the design requirements. Excellent baseline performance, one of the technicians reported to Dr. Hendricks. Electromagnetic isolation is measured above specification across all monitored frequencies. Signal transmission clarity is optimal, and power consumption is within acceptable parameters for extended operational deployment. Maya felt the professional satisfaction that came from technical work executed to the highest standards, but the terminology being used by the testing team carried implications that extended beyond routine equipment evaluation. Extended operational deployment suggested missions measured in months rather than hours, and the frequency ranges being tested indicated communication requirements that went far beyond normal military applications. The second test phase introduced electronic warfare simulation that replicated jamming and interference, techniques used by hostile forces to disrupt military communications. Maya watched the displays show incoming signals designed to overload conventional receivers and transmitters, electromagnetic pulses that would destroy unshielded electronics, and frequency manipulation techniques that could redirect communication traffic to unauthorized receivers monitoring for intelligence purposes. Initiating countermeasure simulation, the lead technician announced, activating equipment that filled the testing chamber with electromagnetic interference intense enough to disrupt unprotected electronics throughout the facility. Measuring communication system performance under electronic warfare conditions. The displays showed the communication housing maintaining perfect signal clarity despite interference that would have rendered normal equipment completely useless. The electromagnetic shielding that Maya had applied in carefully controlled layers was performing exactly as designed, protecting the internal electronics while allowing authorized communications to pass through with no degradation in quality or security. Dr. Hendricks monitored the results with obvious satisfaction, occasionally consulting classified documentation that detailed performance requirements Maya wasn't authorized to see. "Outstanding results," she commented as the electronic warfare simulation reached peak intensity. "The housing is maintaining full operational capability despite countermeasures that would disable every other communication system in the operational theater." Maya understood that the terminology being used indicated combat environments where electronic warfare was actively employed against military forces, situations where communication failures could result in mission compromise and personnel casualties. The equipment they had built wasn't just sophisticated. It was designed to function in circumstances where conventional systems would fail, leaving military units isolated and unable to coordinate operations or request support. The third test sequence involved physical stress simulation that replicated conditions the housing might encounter during operational deployment. Vibration tests simulated transportation in military vehicles over rough terrain. Thermal cycling replicated temperature extremes from Arctic operations to desert environments. And shock testing simulated the impact forces that equipment might experience during combat operations or emergency insertion procedures. Structural integrity remains optimal. The technician monitoring mechanical stress reported as the testing equipment subjected the housing to forces that would destroy commercial-grade electronics. No degradation in electromagnetic performance, despite physical stress levels exceeding operational specifications. Maya watched the results with professional pride, knowing that her welding techniques had created structural connections that could withstand conditions far more severe than typical shipboard installations would ever encounter. But the testing parameters indicated deployment scenarios that went beyond normal military applications, suggesting missions where equipment reliability could determine survival in environments where replacement or repair wouldn't be possible. During a break in the testing sequence, Maya found herself standing beside Dr. Hendricks while technicians recalibrated equipment for the next phase of evaluation. The opportunity for private conversation was limited, but Hendricks seemed to recognize Maya's growing understanding of the project's true nature and the implications of the performance requirements being verified. "The testing results confirm what your military record suggested," Hendricks said quietly, ensuring that their conversation couldn't be overheard by the technical staff focused on their equipment. "Your capabilities extend far beyond civilian welding applications. The precision you've demonstrated indicates training and experience that would be valuable for projects with more significant operational importance." Maya recognized the careful language as a preliminary assessment that would determine whether more direct recruitment discussions were appropriate. Her response would influence whether Dr. Hendricks proceeded with whatever proposition had brought her to oversee a project that clearly exceeded the scope of routine naval equipment upgrade. "I've been out of that environment for 7 years," Maya replied, acknowledging the military background that her previous evasions had been designed to protect. "Civilian life provides stability and predictability that I've learned to value. Whatever you're considering would need to offer compelling reasons to abandon that security." "What if the reasons involve capabilities that only you possess?" Hendricks asked. "Technical knowledge and operational experience that could be critical for missions where conventional approaches have already failed. Situations where your unique background represents the difference between success and catastrophic failure." Maya felt the familiar tension between the appeal of meaningful work and the complications that came with classified responsibilities. Her civilian life at the shipyard was safe and predictable, but it also represented a significant underutilization of capabilities that had once been considered strategically valuable. The prospect of returning to work that fully engaged her technical knowledge carried both professional appeal and personal risk that she would need to evaluate carefully. The final test sequence involved integration with actual military communication systems, demonstrating that the housing could interface with existing infrastructure while providing the enhanced capabilities that justified its sophisticated design. Maya watched encrypted data streams flow through the equipment at rates that indicated real-time operational requirements, confirming that the testing wasn't just theoretical evaluation, but preparation for immediate deployment in active missions. Integration. Testing complete, the lead technician announced as the display showed perfect compatibility between the housing and military communication networks. All performance parameters exceed specifications. The equipment is ready for operational deployment, pending final security certification. Dr. Hendricks reviewed the comprehensive test results with obvious satisfaction, occasionally comparing measurements to classified requirements that established minimum performance standards for equipment used in high-priority operations. Testing had confirmed that Maya's technical work had created capabilities that met or exceeded every specification, validating both her professional competence and the assessment that had brought Dr. Hendricks to recruit her participation. Outstanding work, Hendricks said as the testing equipment was secured and the anechoic chamber began shutdown procedures. Your technical execution has been flawless, and the performance results indicate capabilities that will be operationally significant. I think it's time we discussed opportunities that would make full use of your specialized knowledge and experience. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Maya understood that the successful completion of the communication project had been a demonstration rather than an end goal, a way to verify that her classified capabilities remained at levels that justified whatever recruitment process Dr. Hendricks represented. The conversation that would follow would determine whether her carefully constructed civilian life was about to be disrupted by responsibilities that she had thought were permanently behind her. As the testing equipment was secured according to security protocols that exceeded normal shipyard procedures, Maya realized that her work on the communication housing had answered questions that went far beyond technical specifications. The results had confirmed that she retained capabilities that were apparently still considered strategically valuable, and tomorrow would likely bring decisions that would determine whether those capabilities would remain buried in civilian routine or be called back into service for missions that officially didn't exist. The call came at 2:47 a.m., piercing through Maya's sleep with the electronic urgency that she remembered from missions where timing measured the difference between operational success and strategic disaster. Her phone displayed a number she didn't recognize, but the pattern of digits carried the structured format that indicated official communication from sources that didn't maintain public listings. Maya answered on the second ring, her mind already shifting into the alert state that years of training had made automatic. Ms. Chen, Dr. Hendricks' voice carried the controlled tension that meant urgent developments requiring immediate response. I need you to report to a secure facility within the hour. A situation has developed that requires your immediate technical consultation. A driver will arrive at your location in 15 minutes. Maya was already reaching for clothes before Hendricks finished speaking, her body moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood that emergency calls meant circumstances where delay could have consequences extending far beyond personal inconvenience. What kind of situation? She asked while pulling on work boots that could handle unknown environments and uncertain duration of deployment. The communication equipment you built has been compromised during field testing, Hendricks replied, her tone indicating problems that went beyond routine technical failures. We're facing electromagnetic interference that's defeating the shielding systems you designed. Initial analysis suggests countermeasures that shouldn't exist in the operational theater, and conventional expertise hasn't been able to identify solutions that don't require complete equipment replacement. Maya felt her stomach tighten with recognition of the implications being described. Electromagnetic countermeasures that could defeat military-grade shielding indicated adversary capabilities that exceeded intelligence estimates. and the urgency of Hendricks' call suggested that the compromised equipment was supporting operations, where communication failures could result in mission catastrophe and personnel casualties. "Where are we going?" Maya asked while gathering tools that might be needed for diagnostic work in unknown conditions. "Classified location." Hendricks replied with the standard response that provided no useful information while confirming that the situation involved security levels that exceeded normal military protocol. "Bring any specialized equipment you might need for electromagnetic analysis and field modification work. The technical challenges we're facing may require improvised solutions using available materials." The line went dead, leaving Maya to complete her preparations in the tense silence that preceded deployment to situations where the technical requirements were unknown, but the consequences of failure were clearly significant. She gathered her most versatile diagnostic instruments, along with welding tools that could handle precision work under field conditions, packing everything in a kit bag that had served her through missions where equipment reliability determined whether teams returned from operations that officially never occurred. The driver arrived exactly on schedule, in an unmarked sedan with government license plates that didn't correspond to any civilian agency. He was a young man with military bearing who offered no conversation beyond confirming her identity and providing an estimated travel time that indicated a destination roughly an hour from her apartment. Maya settled into the passenger seat while her mind processed the limited information available and the possible scenarios that could require her specific technical expertise at a classified facility in the middle of the night. The route took them through sections of the city that Maya rarely visited, past industrial complexes and government buildings that remained active despite the late hour. Security checkpoints appeared at intervals that suggested they were approaching facilities that maintained operational readiness around the clock, and the driver's familiarity with the route indicated regular access to locations that didn't appear on civilian maps. After 45 minutes of travel through increasingly restricted areas, they arrived at a facility that resembled a technology research complex more than a traditional military installation. Multiple buildings were connected by covered walkways, and the lighting indicated activity levels that suggested significant operations continuing despite the early morning hour. Security personnel wearing civilian clothes but carrying equipment that indicated military training guided Maya through access procedures that confirmed her identity through multiple verification methods. Dr. Hendricks met Maya at the entrance to a building that contained laboratory facilities unlike anything she had seen in civilian applications. The electromagnetic testing equipment was several generations more advanced than what had been used to evaluate her communication housing, and the security measures indicated information processing capabilities that existed only in facilities with the highest classification levels. "The situation is more complex than I indicated over the phone," Hendricks explained as they walked through corridors lined with secure workspaces, where technicians analyzed data streams that appeared to represent real-time operational intelligence. "The communication equipment you built is currently deployed in a mission where electromagnetic countermeasures are being employed by adversaries who apparently possess capabilities that exceed our intelligence assessments." Maya felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came when technical problems had direct implications for personnel in hostile environments. The communication equipment represented a critical link between field teams and command infrastructure, and failures could leave military units isolated in circumstances where support coordination determined survival outcomes. "What specifically is happening to the equipment?" Maya asked as they entered a secure workspace containing analysis stations that displayed electromagnetic signatures from the compromised communication system. "The shielding systems are being defeated by interference techniques that target specific vulnerabilities in the frequency isolation protocols," Hendricks replied while bringing up displays that showed real-time performance data from the deployed equipment. The countermeasures appear to be designed specifically to exploit characteristics of the electromagnetic shielding that conventional analysis wouldn't have identified. Maya studied the data streams with growing understanding of the technical challenges being faced by the field teams. The interference patterns indicated sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities that could analyze electromagnetic signatures and develop targeted countermeasures that exploited weaknesses in even the most advanced shielding systems. The adversaries were employing techniques that required detailed knowledge of the specific materials and construction methods used in the communication equipment. This level of countermeasure sophistication suggests insider knowledge, Maya observed. While examining frequency analysis data that revealed the precise targeting of the shielding system's design parameters, someone with detailed technical information about the construction methods and material properties has provided intelligence that enabled the development of these specific interference techniques. Hendricks nodded grimly while bringing up additional displays that showed the operational impact of the communication failures. The field teams are currently operating with degraded communication capabilities that prevent coordination with command infrastructure. Mission parameters require immediate restoration of secure communication links, but conventional solutions would require equipment replacement that isn't feasible given current operational constraints. Maya understood that the terminology indicated a mission where teams were deployed in circumstances that prevented normal support procedures. Equipment replacement would require extraction and redeployment that could compromise operational security, or abandon mission objectives that had already required significant investment of resources and personnel. What resources are available for field modification? Maya asked while reviewing technical specifications that detailed the current equipment configuration and the environmental conditions where repairs would need to be performed. Limited to what can be transported to the operational location without compromising mission security, Hendricks replied. Any solutions will need to use materials that can be justified as routine maintenance supplies, and the modification work will need to be performed by personnel already in position rather than specialized technical teams. Maya felt the challenge crystallize into the kind of problem that had once defined her military career: technical requirements that exceeded available resources, performed under conditions where conventional approaches weren't feasible, with consequences that extended far beyond equipment functionality. The solution would require not just technical innovation, but also the ability to work through operational constraints that limited both materials and procedures. I'll need complete technical documentation of the current equipment configuration and detailed analysis of the countermeasure techniques being employed, Maya said while examining the workspace that had been prepared for intensive problem solving. Under time pressure that allowed no margin for iterative approaches. Everything you need is available here, Hendricks replied, gesturing toward secure terminals that contained classified technical information about both the communication equipment and the adversary capabilities being employed against it. Your security clearance has been temporarily reactivated at levels sufficient to access all relevant information, and you have authorization to develop solutions using any resources available through this facility. Maya settled into the workspace with the focused intensity that came when technical challenges aligned with capabilities that had been developed through years of specialized training. The electromagnetic countermeasures being employed against her communication equipment represented a sophisticated threat that would require equally sophisticated solutions, and the operational constraints meant that any approach would need to be both innovative and implementable under field conditions where conventional technical support wasn't available. As she began analyzing the detailed intelligence about adversary capabilities and current equipment performance, Maya understood that the next few hours would determine whether her specialized knowledge could solve problems that had already defeated conventional expertise. The field teams were depending on communication capabilities that only she understood well enough to repair under impossible conditions, and failure would leave them isolated in circumstances where isolation could prove fatal. Maya worked through the classified intelligence data with the systematic precision that had once made her invaluable to operations, where technical analysis determined mission outcomes. The adversary countermeasures were more sophisticated than anything she had encountered during her active service, incorporating techniques that suggested access to classified research and development, information that should have been limited to the highest security levels within American defense infrastructure. The electromagnetic interference patterns displayed on her workstation showed deliberate targeting of the specific metamaterial layers she had applied to the communication housing, exploiting resonance frequencies that could only have been identified through detailed knowledge of the construction methods and material compositions. Someone with intimate understanding of her welding techniques had provided intelligence that enabled the development of countermeasures designed specifically to defeat her shielding systems. The targeting is too precise to be coincidental, Maya told Dr. Hendricks while highlighting frequency analysis data that showed interference peaks aligned exactly with the electromagnetic absorption characteristics of her layered shielding design. These countermeasures were developed using detailed technical specifications that include information about my specific fabrication methods. Hendricks reviewed the data with the grim expression of someone who understood the security implications of what Maya was describing. "We've identified 3 possible sources for the intelligence breach," she replied while bringing up personnel files on a secure display that showed individuals with access to the communication project details. 2 former military contractors with access to the fabrication specifications, and 1 current Navy liaison who reviewed the complete technical documentation. Maya studied the files while her mind processed the tactical situation facing the field teams, whose communication capabilities had been compromised by adversaries using her own technical innovations against them. The irony wasn't lost on her that the specialized knowledge that made her uniquely qualified to build the equipment also made her the only person capable of developing countermeasures to protect it from exploitation. "The field teams need immediate solutions," Maya said while examining real-time performance data that showed continuing degradation of communication effectiveness as the adversary countermeasures adapted to defensive measures being attempted by personnel who lacked detailed understanding of the shielding systems. Conventional electronic warfare responses won't work because they don't address the specific vulnerabilities being exploited. What kind of modifications would restore secure communication capability? Hendricks asked while consulting operational timelines that indicated how much longer the mission could continue without reliable command coordination. Maya began sketching modification concepts on a digital workspace that allowed her to test theoretical approaches against the known countermeasure techniques. The solution would require fundamental changes to the electromagnetic shielding that could be implemented using materials available to field teams without compromising the structural integrity that protected the internal electronics from physical damage. Frequency agility, Maya said as the concept crystallized into a practical approach that could defeat targeting based on fixed electromagnetic characteristics. If we can modify the shielding to dynamically shift its electromagnetic properties across multiple frequency ranges, the countermeasures won't be able to maintain effective targeting of the absorption characteristics. Hendricks leaned forward to examine Maya's preliminary designs, recognizing the innovative approach while understanding the implementation challenges that would be faced by field personnel working under operational constraints. How complex would the modification procedures be? The teams have basic technical training, but nothing approaching your level of specialized expertise. Maya refined her sketches while considering the practical limitations that would constrain any field modification work. The solution needed to be implementable using standard military maintenance equipment and materials that could be justified as routine supply requirements, performed by personnel whose primary training focused on operational rather than technical applications. Modular approach, Maya explained while developing detailed procedures that broke the complex modification into discrete steps that could be performed by following precise instructions without requiring deep understanding of the underlying electromagnetic theory. Prefabricated components that can be installed using conventional techniques, with the sophisticated work done here under controlled conditions. The next 4 hours passed in intensive technical development as Maya designed modification components that could restore secure communication capability while remaining simple enough for field installation under operational constraints. Dr. Hendricks coordinated with fabrication facilities that could produce the required materials using expedited procedures that compressed normal manufacturing timelines into emergency response schedules. The modification components will be ready for transport within 6 hours, Hendricks reported while monitoring production status displays that showed specialized manufacturing equipment working around the clock to meet the urgent timeline requirements. Delivery to the operational location is scheduled for tomorrow evening, which gives the field teams approximately 12 hours to complete the installation before the mission timeline requires communication-dependent coordination. Maya completed the detailed installation procedures while considering every possible complication that field personnel might encounter when working with equipment they didn't fully understand in environments where mistakes could compromise both the mission and the security of the teams performing the modifications. The instructions needed to be comprehensive enough to prevent technical errors while remaining simple enough to follow under operational stress. The critical step is timing the frequency transitions, Maya explained while reviewing the modification procedures with Hendricks. The shielding needs to shift electromagnetic properties in coordinated sequences that prevent the countermeasures from adapting to the new characteristics. If the timing is wrong, the modification could actually make the equipment more vulnerable, rather than less. Hendricks studied the timing requirements with obvious concern about the precision demanded from personnel whose primary expertise lay in operational rather than technical applications. Is there a way to automate the timing sequences so that human error can't compromise the effectiveness? Maya nodded while incorporating automated control systems into her modification design. Built-in timing controllers that manage the frequency transitions according to ALGOR, I to HMs, that adapt to the specific countermeasure techniques being employed. The field teams just need to install the components correctly and activate the system. As dawn approached, Maya's workstation displayed completed modification designs that represented the fusion of her specialized knowledge with innovative approaches to problems that hadn't existed when her original training was developed. The solution incorporated techniques that pushed the boundaries of electromagnetic theory while remaining implementable under field conditions that allowed no margin for technical failure. Outstanding work, Hendricks said while reviewing the final modification specifications. This represents exactly the kind of innovative problem-solving that justified reactivating your security clearance. The field teams will have the tools they need to restore secure communications and complete their mission objectives. Maya felt the professional satisfaction that came from solving technical challenges that had defeated conventional expertise, but also the awareness that her involvement in classified operations was expanding beyond the limited consultation that she had initially agreed to consider. The successful development of countermeasures to defeat adversary electronic warfare capabilities demonstrated knowledge and innovation that would inevitably lead to additional requests for her specialized expertise. There's something else we need to discuss, Hendricks said while securing the technical documentation according to security protocols that would protect the modification designs from the kind of intelligence breach that had enabled the original countermeasures. Your work on this problem has confirmed capabilities that are strategically significant for operations that extend beyond this immediate situation. Maya understood that her technical success had been both a solution to the current crisis and a demonstration that would influence decisions about her future involvement in classified operations. The modification designs represented innovations that couldn't be replicated by conventional expertise, and the operational value of such capabilities would make her an attractive asset for missions that required technical solutions to problems that standard military resources couldn't address. The field teams will have everything they need to restore communication security, Maya said while organizing her tools and preparing to return to what she hoped would remain her civilian life at the shipyard. The modification procedures are comprehensive, and the automated timing systems should prevent implementation errors that could compromise effectiveness. Hendricks nodded while making final preparations for the expedited delivery of modification components to the operational location. "Your technical contribution has been invaluable," she said. "But I suspect this won't be the last time we need to call on your specialized expertise for situations where conventional solutions aren't adequate." As Maya prepared to leave the classified facility, she understood that her carefully constructed civilian normalcy had been permanently altered by her demonstration of capabilities that remained strategically valuable. The successful resolution of the communication crisis would be remembered by people who made decisions about operational requirements that exceeded the resources available through conventional military channels, and her name would be associated with technical innovations that solved problems others couldn't even understand. The drive back to her apartment took her through the same industrial areas she had traveled hours earlier, but the familiar landscape now felt different, marked by the knowledge that her skills remained relevant to operations that officially didn't exist in locations that didn't appear on civilian maps. Maya stared out the window at the city awakening to another ordinary day, knowing that her own ordinary days were numbered by forces beyond her control. Maya returned to her apartment as the sun climbed over the industrial skyline, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders like the heavy equipment she carried during her active service years. The familiar surroundings of her civilian life seemed strangely distant after the intensive night of classified technical work, and she found herself examining her modest living space with the analytical awareness that came when ordinary environments felt temporary and potentially compromised. She showered and changed into work clothes, knowing that maintaining her regular schedule at the shipyard was essential for preserving the cover identity that protected both her security and the operational security of whatever mission her modified communication equipment was now supporting. The electromagnetic countermeasures she had designed would be protecting field teams whose names she would never know, operating in locations that didn't exist on official maps, performing missions that would never appear in historical records. At Northport Shipyard, Maya returned to her regular welding assignments with mechanical precision, but her concentration remained divided between the routine tasks that defined her civilian employment and the awareness that somewhere her technical innovations were being implemented under conditions where success or failure would determine whether American operatives survived or disappeared into the kind of intelligence disasters that shaped international relations for decades. Jack Morrison noticed her distraction during the morning break, approaching with the concerned expression of a veteran who recognized when colleagues were processing experiences that couldn't be discussed in normal conversation. "You look like you haven't slept," he observed while settling into the chair beside her in the break room. "Is everything okay with that special project? Heard they wrapped up the testing yesterday." Maya sipped coffee that tasted like routine normalcy while her mind remained focused on frequency modulation algorithms and electromagnetic countermeasure techniques that represented the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure for personnel whose identities were classified above her clearance level. "Finish the work," she replied with careful honesty. The Navy seemed satisfied with the results. "Good to hear," Jack said, though his expression suggested he sensed the incomplete nature of her response. Projects like that can be complicated. Military specifications always seem to come with requirements that extend beyond what they tell the contractors up front. Maya nodded while recognizing the wisdom in Jack's casual observation. Military contracts did indeed carry complications that civilian workers rarely anticipated, and her recent experience had confirmed that the most significant complications were often the ones that remained invisible until operational requirements demanded capabilities that officially didn't exist. Pete Valdez joined them at the break table, carrying coffee and the relaxed demeanor of someone whose primary concerns remained entirely within the predictable boundaries of civilian employment. "Heard Maya finish that fancy Navy project," he said while settling into his chair. "Must be nice to get back to normal welding work where the specifications make sense and the supervisors speak English instead of acronyms." "Normal work has its advantages," Maya agreed, though the concept of normalcy had been fundamentally altered by her demonstration that she retained capabilities that were apparently still considered strategically valuable by people who made decisions about operations that required technical solutions to problems that conventional military resources couldn't address. The conversation drifted to weekend plans and shipyard gossip, the comfortable routine of workers whose lives followed predictable patterns unaffected by classified operations and electromagnetic warfare techniques. Maya participated with appropriate responses while her attention remained partially focused on scanning the shipyard environment for signs that her civilian cover had been compromised by association with classified activities. The afternoon brought routine welding assignments that required minimal concentration, allowing Maya's mind to process the implications of her expanding involvement in operations that officially didn't exist. The successful development of electromagnetic countermeasures had demonstrated knowledge and innovation that couldn't be replicated through conventional expertise, making her an attractive asset for missions that required technical capabilities beyond what standard military resources could provide. At 4:30, Maya's phone buzzed with a text message that appeared to come from Dr. Hendricks, but used language that indicated coded communication requiring careful interpretation. "Technical consultation successful. Field implementation proceeding according to specifications. Additional projects may require similar expertise in the near future." Maya read the message twice before deleting it, understanding that the field teams had successfully installed her electromagnetic modifications and restored secure communication capabilities that would enable mission completion. But the reference to additional projects confirmed her growing suspicion that her involvement in classified operations would expand beyond the limited consultation that she had initially agreed to consider. The workday ended with Maya completing her assigned sections of hull plating with the mechanical precision that had become routine during 6 months of civilian employment at Northport. She secured her tools and signed out according to standard procedures, but her awareness remained focused on the probability that her carefully constructed ordinary life was about to be disrupted by responsibilities that would require leaving behind the predictable security of industrial employment. As Maya walked to her car through the familiar shipyard environment, she noticed additional security guards at the main gate and unfamiliar vehicles in the visitor parking area that suggested increased surveillance or preparation for activities that exceeded normal operational requirements. The changes were subtle enough to escape civilian attention, but obvious to someone with training in operational security and threat assessment. During the drive home, Maya's phone rang with a call from a number that she didn't recognize but that followed the pattern indicating official communication from sources that maintain secure contact protocols. She answered while navigating traffic that seemed to include an unusual number of vehicles that might have been conducting surveillance of her route. "Ms. Chen," the voice belonged to someone she hadn't spoken with before, though the tone carried the controlled authority that indicated military command structure. "This is Colonel Harrison with the Defense Intelligence Agency. We need to schedule a meeting to discuss your potential involvement in operations that require your specialized technical expertise." Maya felt her stomach tighten with recognition that her expanding involvement in classified activities had reached levels that would be difficult to retreat from, without compromising operational security that extended far beyond her personal preferences. What kind of operations? She asked while pulling into a parking lot where she could focus complete attention on a conversation that would likely determine the future direction of her professional life. The kind that require capabilities that you've demonstrated through your recent technical work, Harrison replied with the careful language that provided no specific information while confirming that her electromagnetic countermeasure innovations had been evaluated at command levels that made strategic decisions about resource allocation for operations that required exceptional expertise. I'm a civilian contractor with limited security clearance, Maya said, providing the standard response that acknowledged her current status while avoiding commitment to responsibilities that she wasn't certain she wanted to accept. Your clearance status can be modified to accommodate operational requirements, Harrison replied. And your civilian employment provides useful cover for activities that benefit from appearing to be unrelated to military operations. We're not asking you to abandon your current life just to make yourself available for consultation when situations arise that require your specific knowledge. Maya understood that the offer represented a compromise that would allow her to maintain her civilian identity while providing technical expertise for classified operations that required capabilities beyond what conventional military resources could supply. The arrangement would preserve her shipyard employment while acknowledging that her specialized knowledge remained strategically valuable for missions that officially didn't exist. What would be required? Maya asked, recognizing that she was already committed to a level of involvement that made complete withdrawal impossible without raising security concerns that could complicate both her civilian life and the operational security of missions that had already benefited from her technical contributions. Periodic consultation on technical problems that require your specific expertise, Harrison replied. Most of the work can be done remotely, though some situations may require temporary deployment to locations where your direct involvement is necessary for mission success. Compensation would reflect the specialized nature of your contributions and the security requirements that limit our ability to use conventional technical resources. As Maya considered the offer, she understood that her demonstration of capabilities that exceeded conventional expertise had made her an attractive asset for operations that required technical solutions to problems that standard military resources couldn't address. The electromagnetic countermeasures she had developed represented innovations that could be applied to challenges extending far beyond communication security, and her willingness to work under classified constraints made her suitable for missions that required both technical excellence and operational discretion. I'll need time to consider the implications, Maya said while recognizing that her response would influence decisions about her future involvement in activities that would fundamentally alter the nature of her carefully constructed civilian existence. Take whatever time you need, Harrison replied. But understand that situations requiring your expertise may develop with little advance notice, and some opportunities to contribute to national security objectives may not wait for extended deliberation about personal preferences. The call ended, leaving Maya to sit in her car in the parking lot while processing the realization that her civilian normalcy had been permanently altered by her demonstration of technical capabilities that remained strategically valuable to people who made decisions about operations that shaped international relations in ways that never appeared in public records. The second emergency call came 3 weeks later, shattering Maya's Tuesday evening routine with the electronic urgency that she had learned to associate with operational crises requiring immediate technical intervention. This time the number belonged to Colonel Harrison, and his voice carried the controlled tension that indicated developing situations where conventional resources had already proven inadequate for mission-critical requirements. Ms. Chen, we have a situation that requires your immediate expertise, Harrison said without preamble, his tone indicating that preliminary discussions about availability and compensation had been superseded by circumstances that allowed no time for negotiation. A specialized facility has been compromised, and the technical challenges exceed the capabilities of conventional military engineering teams. Maya was already reaching for her emergency kit before Harrison finished explaining the basic parameters of the crisis. What kind of facility? She asked while pulling on clothes suitable for unknown environments and uncertain duration of deployment. Classified research installation. Harrison replied with the standard terminology that provided no useful information while confirming that the situation involved security levels that exceeded normal military protocol. Electronic warfare countermeasures have disabled the facility's defensive systems, and attempts to restore functionality using conventional expertise have been unsuccessful. Intelligence indicates that the same adversary capabilities you encountered in your recent communication project are being employed against infrastructure that supports operations critical to national security. Maya felt the familiar combination of professional challenge and operational responsibility that had once defined her military career. The adversaries who had developed countermeasures specifically designed to defeat her electromagnetic shielding techniques were apparently expanding their capabilities to target broader infrastructure that relied on similar protection systems. Where is the facility located? Maya asked while gathering specialized diagnostic equipment that might be needed for analysis work under field conditions. Remote location that requires helicopter transport, Harrison replied. A team will pick you up from the designated coordinates within 30 minutes. Bring whatever technical equipment you might need for electromagnetic analysis and system restoration work under potentially hostile conditions. The helicopter arrived exactly on schedule, its military markings obscured by civilian registration numbers that provided cover for operations that couldn't be officially acknowledged. The pilot wore standard civilian flight gear, but his navigation equipment included military-grade systems that indicated capabilities for operating in contested airspace where conventional aircraft would be vulnerable to electronic warfare countermeasures. During the flight, Maya reviewed classified briefing materials on a hardened tablet that detailed the facility's purpose and the nature of the technical failures that had prompted her emergency deployment. The installation housed research into advanced electromagnetic applications that supported intelligence operations, requiring capabilities that didn't exist in civilian technology, and the defensive systems that protected the facility had been specifically targeted by countermeasures that exploited vulnerabilities in their shielding designs. The facility's electromagnetic isolation has been completely compromised, Dr. Hendricks explained through the helicopter's secure communication system. Research data is being intercepted, defensive systems have been disabled, and attempts to restore protection using conventional countermeasures have been unsuccessful. Initial analysis suggests that the same adversary capabilities used against your communication equipment are being employed against infrastructure that shares similar electromagnetic characteristics. Maya studied the technical specifications. While understanding that the facility's compromise represented a significant intelligence disaster that could expose research programs supporting operations that required technological advantages unavailable through conventional military resources. The electromagnetic warfare techniques being employed against the installation indicated adversary capabilities that exceeded previous intelligence assessments and suggested access to classified information about American defensive technologies. The helicopter descended toward a facility that appeared to be a private research complex rather than a military installation. Its buildings connected by covered walkways and surrounded by terrain that provided natural electromagnetic isolation from civilian communication traffic. Security personnel wearing civilian clothes but carrying military-grade equipment guided Maya through access procedures that confirmed her identity, through biometric verification systems that existed only in facilities with the highest classification levels. Inside the main building, Maya found herself in an environment that resembled a sophisticated technology laboratory suffering from systematic electronic warfare attack. Displays flickered with interference patterns, communication systems produced only static, and electromagnetic measurement equipment registered chaotic signatures that indicated deliberate disruption of the facility's protective systems. The countermeasures are targeting specific frequencies that correspond to our electromagnetic shielding materials, Dr. Hendricks explained while leading Maya through corridors lined with research facilities that contained equipment unlike anything she had seen in civilian applications. The interference patterns suggest detailed knowledge of our defensive system specifications and the ability to generate targeted signals that exploit vulnerabilities in the protection protocols. Maya examined the electromagnetic analysis displays. With growing recognition of the sophisticated nature of the attack being conducted against the facility, the countermeasure techniques were more advanced than anything she had encountered during her previous consultation, incorporating adaptive algorithms that modified their targeting characteristics in response to defensive measures being attempted by the facility's technical staff. This is beyond electronic warfare, Maya observed while studying frequency analysis data that showed deliberate exploitation of resonance characteristics specific to the facility's shielding systems. Someone with intimate knowledge of your defensive technologies has provided intelligence that enabled the development of countermeasures designed specifically to defeat your electromagnetic protection. Dr. Hendricks nodded grimly while bringing up security assessment displays that showed the scope of the intelligence breach that had enabled such precisely targeted attacks. We've identified several possible sources for the technical information, but the immediate priority is restoring defensive capabilities before additional research data is compromised. Maya spent the next 4 hours analyzing the facility's electromagnetic protection systems, while developing countermeasures that could restore security against adversary capabilities that seemed to anticipate every defensive technique being employed. The solution required fundamental modifications to the shielding approach that would make the protection systems immune to targeting based on their previous electromagnetic characteristics. Metamaterial reconfiguration, Maya explained while sketching modification concepts that could defeat adversary countermeasures by dynamically altering the electromagnetic properties of the facility's defensive systems. If we can modify the shielding to continuously shift its frequency response characteristics, the countermeasures won't be able to maintain effective targeting of specific vulnerabilities. The modification work required precision that exceeded the capabilities of the facility's technical staff, forcing Maya to perform critical installations personally while working under conditions where electromagnetic interference created additional hazards for equipment that relied on precise calibration. The countermeasures being employed against the facility actively disrupted her diagnostic instruments, requiring innovative approaches to verification that didn't depend on conventional measurement techniques. Restoration proceeding according to specifications, Maya reported to Dr. Hendricks after completing the primary shielding modifications. The metamaterial reconfiguration should provide protection against the current countermeasure techniques, but the adversaries may develop adaptive responses that require additional modifications. As the facility's defensive systems came back online, the electromagnetic interference patterns that had disrupted research operations began to diminish, replaced by the clean signal environments that enabled the sophisticated work being conducted. In the classified laboratories, Maya's modifications had restored not just security, but the operational capabilities that made the facility valuable for research programs supporting intelligence operations that required technological advantages unavailable through conventional resources. Outstanding work, Dr. Hendricks said while monitoring displays that confirmed the restoration of full electromagnetic isolation. Your technical innovations have saved research programs that represent years of development and millions of dollars in classified investment. The facility is now protected against countermeasures that defeated our previous defensive systems. Maya secured her equipment while understanding that her successful resolution of the facility crisis had demonstrated capabilities that would inevitably lead to additional requests for her specialized expertise. The metamaterial modifications she had developed represented innovations that could be applied to electromagnetic challenges extending far beyond the immediate facility protection requirements. "There's something else we need to discuss," Dr. Hendricks said while escorting Maya toward the helicopter landing area where transport back to civilian life was waiting. "Your work on this problem has confirmed technical capabilities that are strategically significant for operations that require electromagnetic solutions beyond what conventional military resources can provide." Maya understood that her technical success had been both a solution to the current crisis and a demonstration that would influence decisions about her future role in classified operations that required capabilities exceeding standard military expertise. The electromagnetic innovations she had developed couldn't be replicated by conventional technical teams, making her an increasingly valuable asset for missions that required solutions to problems that standard resources couldn't address. As the helicopter lifted off from the facility that she had just protected from sophisticated adversary countermeasures, Maya realized that her civilian normalcy was becoming increasingly incompatible with her expanding involvement in operations that required technical excellence under conditions where failure could compromise national security objectives that shaped international relations in ways that never appeared in public documentation. The crisis that would change everything began on a Thursday morning that started like any other day at Northport Shipyard. Maya was working on routine hull welding when the first reports reached the facility through emergency broadcast systems that civilian workers monitored for weather alerts and safety notifications. The initial news seemed distant and abstract. A major infrastructure failure had disabled communication networks across the northeastern seaboard, affecting military installations and government facilities from Washington to Boston. Jack Morrison approached Maya's workstation during the mid-morning break, his expression carrying the concern of someone who understood that infrastructure failures of such magnitude didn't occur through routine equipment problems. "You hearing about this communication blackout?" he asked while glancing toward the administrative building where supervisors were huddled around emergency radios that still functioned despite the broader network failures. Maya paused in her welding work to listen to the radio reports that described systematic failures affecting everything from military command networks to civilian emergency services. The pattern of outages suggested coordinated attacks rather than random equipment failures, and the geographic scope indicated adversary capabilities that exceeded anything previously demonstrated against American infrastructure. "Sounds like more than routine technical problems," Maya observed while recognizing electromagnetic warfare signatures in the failure patterns being described by news reports that couldn't identify the sophisticated nature of what was actually occurring. Pete Valdez joined them near Maya's workstation, carrying his radio that was tuned to emergency frequencies normally used for severe weather warnings. "Military bases are going dark," he reported with obvious concern. "Whatever's happening, it's affecting classified facilities that aren't supposed to be vulnerable to civilian infrastructure problems." Maya felt her stomach tighten with recognition of the implications being described. Systematic communication failures affecting military installations suggested adversary capabilities that could target the same electromagnetic vulnerabilities that she had been working to address in her classified consultations. The attacks appeared to be employing countermeasures similar to those she had encountered at the research facility, but on a scale that indicated strategic rather than tactical objectives. her secure phone buzzed with an incoming call that she recognized as emergency priority based on the specific ringtone that indicated classified communication requiring immediate response. Maya stepped away from her coworkers to answer while moving toward a location where her conversation couldn't be overheard by civilian personnel who lacked security clearances for the information she was about to receive. "Miss Chen, this is Colonel Harrison." The voice carried the controlled urgency that indicated developing crises requiring immediate mobilization of specialized resources. "We're facing a coordinated electromagnetic warfare attack that has disabled communication systems, supporting critical national security operations. Conventional countermeasures have been ineffective, and intelligence indicates that the adversary capabilities are based on techniques specifically designed to defeat defensive systems similar to those you've worked on." Maya understood that the infrastructure failures being reported through civilian channels represented only the visible portion of attacks that were probably targeting classified facilities and operations that couldn't be discussed through normal communication networks. "What's the scope of the affected systems?" she asked while calculating the technical challenges that would be involved in restoring capabilities across multiple installations simultaneously. "Comprehensive," Harrison replied with the grim tone that indicated strategic-level disasters requiring responses that exceeded conventional military resources. "Command and control networks, intelligence communication systems, and defensive infrastructure supporting operations that can't continue without secure electromagnetic environments. We're facing the possibility of mission failures that could compromise national security objectives that have required years of development and enormous resource investment." Maya felt the weight of responsibility that came when technical problems had direct implications for strategic operations whose failure could alter international relations in ways that shaped global stability for decades. "Where do you need me?" she asked while understanding that her response would commit her to involvement in crisis resolution that would require abandoning her civilian life for whatever duration the emergency demanded. "Multiple locations," Harrison replied with the tone that indicated deployment requirements exceeding normal consultation parameters. "The attacks are coordinated across facilities that require on-site technical expertise for countermeasure development and implementation. Your electromagnetic innovations represent the only solutions that have proven effective against the adversary capabilities being employed." Maya gathered her specialized equipment while processing the realization that her expanding involvement in classified operations had reached the point where her technical capabilities were considered essential for responding to strategic-level crises that threaten core national security infrastructure. The electromagnetic countermeasures she had developed were apparently the only defensive techniques that could protect against adversary capabilities that had defeated conventional military electronic warfare resources. The helicopter that arrived at the shipyard's emergency landing area was a military transport configured for rapid deployment to multiple locations under operational conditions that might include hostile electronic warfare environments. The pilot and crew wore standard military gear without unit insignia, indicating special operations support for missions that required operational security exceeding normal military transport protocols. During the flight toward the first of several facilities that required her immediate technical intervention, Maya reviewed classified intelligence briefings that detailed the scope and sophistication of the coordinated attacks being conducted against American electromagnetic infrastructure. The adversary capabilities represented a level of electronic warfare technology that exceeded previous intelligence assessments and suggested years of development, specifically focused on defeating defensive systems that protected critical national security operations. The attacks are targeting facilities that support intelligence operations, requiring electromagnetic isolation from hostile surveillance, Dr. Hendricks explained through the helicopter's secure communication system while reviewing target assessment data that showed the strategic implications of the infrastructure failures. Communication networks supporting field operations have been compromised. Defensive systems protecting classified research have been disabled, and command coordination capabilities have been reduced to emergency backup systems that provide minimal operational support. Maya studied the technical analysis data while understanding that the attacks represented more than sophisticated electronic warfare. They indicated adversary access to detailed intelligence about American electromagnetic defensive technologies and the operational requirements that those systems were designed to protect. The countermeasures being employed were specifically tailored to exploit vulnerabilities in shielding systems that she had helped develop and improve. This suggests insider intelligence, Maya observed while reviewing frequency analysis data, that showed precisely targeted attacks against electromagnetic characteristics that would only be known to personnel with detailed technical knowledge of American defensive capabilities. Someone with access to classified specifications has provided information that enabled the development of these specific countermeasure techniques. Dr. Hendricks nodded grimly while bringing up security assessment displays that showed the investigation into intelligence breaches that could have enabled such precisely targeted attacks. We've identified several individuals with access to the relevant technical information, but the immediate priority is restoring defensive capabilities before additional critical operations are compromised. The first facility that Maya visited was a command center supporting intelligence operations in regions where American strategic interests required coordination, capabilities that couldn't rely on civilian communication infrastructure. The electromagnetic attacks had disabled secure communication networks that connected field teams to command coordination, leaving personnel in hostile environments without support capabilities that determined whether missions succeeded or resulted. In catastrophic personnel losses, Maya worked for 8 hours straight to develop and implement countermeasures that could restore secure communication capabilities despite adversary electronic warfare attacks that adapted to defensive measures. In real time, the technical challenges required innovations that exceeded her previous electromagnetic work, forcing her to develop solutions that hadn't been theoretically possible when her original training was completed. Communication restoration successful. Maya reported to the facility commander after completing modifications that protected the communication systems against countermeasures that had defeated every previous defensive attempt. The metamaterial adaptive shielding should provide protection against current adversary capabilities while maintaining operational flexibility for field coordination requirements. The second facility required similar modifications to protect research operations that supported intelligence capabilities requiring technological advantages that weren't available through conventional military resources. Maya's electromagnetic innovations restored not just security, but the operational capabilities that made the facility valuable for programs that shaped American strategic advantages in ways that never appeared in public documentation. As Maya worked through the night to restore capabilities at a third facility that supported field operations, requiring secure coordination despite hostile electronic warfare environments, she understood that her role in classified operations had evolved far beyond periodic consultation. Her technical capabilities had become essential for maintaining national security infrastructure that couldn't function without electromagnetic protection systems that only she understood well enough to defend against sophisticated adversary countermeasures. The crisis was revealing that her specialized knowledge represented strategic capabilities that couldn't be replicated through conventional military resources, making her increasingly valuable for operations that required technical solutions to problems that threatened core national security objectives. Maya realized that her civilian life had become incompatible with responsibilities that extended far beyond personal preferences and career choices. By dawn, Maya had restored electromagnetic defensive capabilities at 4 critical facilities. But intelligence reports indicated that additional attacks were being prepared against infrastructure that supported operations requiring secure communication environments. Her technical innovations had proven effective against adversary capabilities that had defeated conventional countermeasures, but the scope of the strategic challenge suggested that emergency consultations would need to become permanent assignment to responsibilities. That couldn't be addressed through part-time involvement. The satellite phone rang at 6:23 a.m. as Maya sat in the secure transport vehicle, exhaustion weighing heavily after 36 hours of continuous crisis response across multiple classified facilities. The caller ID showed only encrypted numbers, but the priority override tone indicated communication from command levels that made strategic decisions about operations, requiring capabilities beyond conventional military resources. Ms. Chen, this is General Patricia Knox, Defense Intelligence Agency. The voice carried absolute authority that cut through Maya's fatigue with crystalline clarity. We've been monitoring your technical work during the current crisis, and the results have been exceptional. However, intelligence indicates that the adversary capabilities we're facing represent only the initial phase of a broader campaign designed to systematically disable American electromagnetic infrastructure. Maya felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came when personal choices intersected with strategic requirements that shaped international security in ways that extended far beyond individual preferences. What additional intelligence has been developed? She asked while reviewing classified status reports that detailed the scope of electromagnetic attacks against facilities supporting operations critical to national security. Signals intelligence has identified preparation for coordinated attacks against infrastructure that supports field operations requiring secure communication despite hostile electronic warfare environments. General Knox replied with the controlled tension that indicated developing threats requiring immediate mobilization of specialized resources. The adversary capabilities include countermeasures specifically designed to defeat electromagnetic defensive systems based on your technical innovations. Maya understood that her successful restoration of capabilities at multiple facilities had demonstrated both the effectiveness of her countermeasures and their strategic importance for protecting infrastructure that couldn't function without electromagnetic isolation from hostile surveillance and interference. The adversaries had apparently identified her technical contributions as threats requiring specific countermeasures designed to defeat her innovations. We need to discuss your transition to full operational status, General Knox continued while Maya processed the implications of permanent assignment to responsibilities that would require abandoning her civilian identity for classified work that officially didn't exist in locations that didn't appear on public maps. The technical challenges we're facing exceed the capabilities of conventional military engineering resources, and your electromagnetic innovations represent strategic capabilities that are essential for maintaining operational effectiveness against adversary electronic warfare techniques. The transport vehicle arrived at Andrews Air Force Base, where a specialized aircraft waited with engines already running for immediate departure to destinations that would be determined by developing intelligence about adversary attack preparations. Maya recognized the aircraft configuration as modified for electronic warfare environments, with electromagnetic shielding that would protect onboard systems against countermeasures that could disable conventional military transport. General Knox met Maya at the aircraft boarding ramp, her presence indicating the strategic importance of whatever mission required immediate deployment to locations where electromagnetic countermeasure expertise was essential for operational success. Knox wore standard military uniform with insignia that indicated Special Operations Command authority, and her demeanor carried the focused intensity of someone accustomed to making decisions that shaped international relations through capabilities that never appeared in public documentation. The situation has escalated beyond crisis response, Knox explained while escorting Maya aboard the aircraft that contains secure communication facilities and technical equipment for developing countermeasures. During flight to operational locations, intelligence indicates coordinated attacks against facilities supporting field teams, whose missions require electromagnetic isolation from hostile electronic warfare capabilities. Maya settled into the aircraft workstation that had been configured for intensive technical analysis under conditions where conventional laboratory resources weren't available. The equipment included specialized electromagnetic measurement, instruments and fabrication capabilities for developing countermeasures using materials that could be transported to operational locations without compromising mission security. What's the operational timeline? Maya asked while reviewing intelligence assessments that detailed adversary, electronic warfare capabilities, and the strategic implications of infrastructure failures that could compromise field operations requiring secure coordination with command elements, immediate deployment to forward operating locations, where field teams are conducting missions that can't continue without electromagnetic protection against countermeasures that have defeated conventional defensive systems. Knox replied while consulting secure communication displays that showed real-time intelligence about developing threats, requiring technical solutions that exceeded standard military capabilities. During the flight, Maya worked with intelligence analysts to develop a comprehensive understanding of adversary, electronic warfare techniques, and the specific vulnerabilities being exploited in American electromagnetic defensive systems. The analysis revealed sophisticated coordination between multiple adversary organizations that had apparently pooled resources to develop capabilities specifically designed to defeat defensive technologies that protected critical national security. Operations. The countermeasures are based on detailed intelligence about our electromagnetic shielding materials and fabrication techniques. Maya observed while examining frequency analysis data that showed precisely targeted attacks against characteristics that could only be known through access to classified technical specifications. This suggests intelligence breaches that extend beyond single individuals to coordinated efforts involving multiple sources with access to our most sensitive defensive technologies. General Knox reviewed the analysis with obvious concern about the security implications of adversary capabilities that indicated systematic intelligence collection efforts targeting American electromagnetic defensive research. We've initiated comprehensive security reviews, but the immediate priority is protecting field operations that can't be delayed while investigation procedures are completed. The aircraft descended toward a remote airfield that served as staging area for operations requiring rapid deployment to locations where conventional military logistics couldn't provide adequate support. The facility appeared to be a civilian airport, but the security procedures and specialized equipment indicated capabilities for supporting classified missions that required operational security exceeding normal military protocols. Your destination is classified, Knox informed Maya as they prepared for transfer to helicopter transport that would provide a final approach to the operational location where her electromagnetic expertise was required for mission-critical technical support. The field teams you'll be supporting are conducting operations that require absolute electromagnetic security against countermeasures that could compromise both mission success and personnel safety. The helicopter flight took Maya over terrain that provided natural electromagnetic isolation from civilian communication traffic, approaching a facility that appeared to be a remote research installation, but contained capabilities for supporting operations that required technological advantages unavailable through conventional military resources. Security personnel wearing civilian clothes but carrying specialized equipment guided her through access procedures that confirmed her identity through biometric systems that existed only in facilities with strategic classification levels. Inside the facility, Maya found herself in an environment that resembled a forward operating base configured for electronic warfare operations, rather than a traditional research laboratory. Communication equipment filled multiple rooms. Electromagnetic measurement instruments monitored threat environments in real time, and technical staff worked with the focused intensity of personnel supporting missions where success or failure would be determined by technological superiority over adversary capabilities. The field teams are operating in environments where adversary electronic warfare capabilities are actively employed against our communication systems, the facility commander explained while leading Maya through corridors lined with equipment that supported operations requiring electromagnetic protection against countermeasures that could disable conventional military systems. Your countermeasure innovations represent the only defensive techniques that have proven effective against the sophisticated threats being employed. Maya examined the operational intelligence displays that showed real-time electromagnetic signatures from hostile environments where American field teams were conducting missions requiring coordination with command elements despite adversary efforts to disrupt communication capabilities. The countermeasures being employed against the teams indicated electronic warfare techniques that exceeded previous intelligence assessments and suggested adversary access to detailed information about American operational methods. The teams need immediate technical support. The commander continued while reviewing mission status reports that indicated communication degradation, threatening operational effectiveness. Conventional countermeasures have been unsuccessful, and mission timelines don't allow for extraction and redeployment with different equipment. Maya understood that she was being asked to provide technical solutions under field conditions where failure could result in mission compromise and personnel casualties. The electromagnetic challenges exceeded anything she had encountered during her previous consultations, requiring innovations that pushed beyond theoretical possibilities into practical applications that hadn't been previously attempted under operational constraints. I'll need complete technical specifications for the current equipment configuration and detailed analysis of the countermeasure techniques being employed against the field teams, Maya said while examining the workspace that had been prepared for intensive problem-solving under conditions where conventional technical resources weren't available. General Knox approached Maya's workstation with classified documentation that detailed both the operational requirements and the strategic implications of mission success or failure. Your electromagnetic innovations have become essential capabilities for operations that protect national security interests, requiring technological advantages that can't be maintained without your specialized expertise. Maya realized that her expanding involvement in classified operations had reached the point where her technical capabilities were considered strategic assets that couldn't be risked through continued civilian employment. The electromagnetic countermeasures she had developed represented innovations that were apparently unique and irreplaceable for protecting operations that shaped American strategic advantages in ways that determined international relations. This isn't temporary consultation, Knox said while reviewing personnel documentation that indicated permanent assignment to responsibilities that would require abandoning civilian identity for classified work supporting operations that officially didn't exist. Your technical capabilities have become essential for maintaining electromagnetic superiority that protects field operations, requiring secure coordination despite hostile electronic warfare environments. As Maya began analyzing the technical challenges that threatened field teams operating under conditions where electromagnetic security determined survival, she understood that her carefully constructed civilian life had been permanently superseded by responsibilities that extended far beyond personal preferences. Her specialized knowledge had become strategically valuable in ways that made her an essential asset for operations that couldn't succeed without capabilities that only she could provide. The transformation was complete. Maya Chen, the shipyard. Welder had become an essential component of America's most classified electromagnetic warfare capabilities. Her identity forever changed by technical innovations that had proven critical for protecting operations that shaped international security. Through methods that would never appear in historical records, 3 months later, Maya stood in a different kind of workshop. Not the industrial chaos of Northport Shipyard, but a pristine laboratory buried beneath the Pentagon where her innovations protected field teams across 6 continents. Her hands, once guided by routine welding schedules, now shaped electromagnetic technologies that didn't officially exist. The irony wasn't lost on her. For years, her coworkers had seen only coveralls and safety goggles, never suspecting that their quiet colleague possessed knowledge that could shift the balance of global power. Jack Morrison still sent occasional texts asking when she'd return from her extended Navy consulting project. She never replied. Her reflection in the laboratory's darkened windows showed the same face, but everything else had changed. Where? Maya the welder had been overlooked and underestimated. Dr. Maya Chen, her restored rank and new title commanded resources that most generals never accessed. Her electromagnetic innovations were being integrated into systems that protected American interests in places that didn't appear on any map. The secure phone on her workbench displayed a message from General Knox: new crisis developing. Your countermeasures needed in classified location. Departure in 2 hours. Maya gathered her specialized equipment with practiced efficiency. Somewhere, field teams were facing electromagnetic warfare that could leave them isolated in hostile territory. Her innovations would keep them connected, keep them alive, keep their mission successful. She had never sought recognition, never demanded acknowledgement of her sacrifices. But when the impossible happened, when every expert failed and conventional wisdom crumbled, they had called her by the name that mattered: the architect of electromagnetic superiority. Sometimes, the strongest voice is the one that never needed to raise itself. Sometimes the most important work happens in shadows, where medals aren't awarded but lives are saved. If Maya's journey moved you, if her quiet strength reminds you that true expertise often goes unrecognized until the moment it becomes essential, leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Subscribe for more stories that honor the unsung heroes who shape our world through capabilities that most people never see but everyone depends on.